Today, it's a story about revenge. It's about a woman named Gudrun the Vengeful, a Norse woman who's said to have lived in the 5th century AD. And this is centuries before the Viking ships came raiding out of Scandinavia into the rest of Europe. Gudrun the Vengeful belongs to the semi-mythic Viking past. Even though she's mentioned in several Norse classic texts, it's not clear that Gudrun existed at all. But her story is grounded in some extremely interesting historical reality. And certainly people in the Viking Age thought of Gudrun as a real person. And more than that, they thought of her as a shining example of Viking womanhood. Not for her beauty or for her forbearance or for her sweetness, but for her willingness to pay the highest price to take her revenge. Now, although it's said that today we live in a post-Christian world, the Western world still leans on Christian morality, and Christian morality insists you must forswear vengeance. You must forgive your enemy, even if they haven't asked for it. Hankering for revenge is bad for the soul, and there's a kind of honour in resigning it. But in the Viking world, things were different. You were expected to take your revenge if you wanted to keep your honour and your name. And this concept applied to women just as strongly as it did to Viking men. Hello, Kári.
Hi, Richard. Yes, we get her story in quite a lot of different places and different poems and different sagas. And she was a very well-known figure in the Viking world. She was obviously a kind of symbol of a certain code, a certain heroic code, and a certain kind of honour. An absolute honour that required total commitment to your family, and especially to your blood relations. Gudrun is uncompromising in her desire for honour, and her desire for vengeance, and her desire to do everything she can to protect and promote her own family. And I think in the Viking Age, she came to stand for women who took this absolute line on honour.
Where do we get this story from, Kári?
In the Norse tradition, the sources of her life are a saga called Völsunga Saga, and then also the poetic Edda, the Elder Edda, which includes a poem called Attila Kvíða, which means the Lay of Atli, or as we'll call him here, the Lay of Attila. That probably dates from around the 9th century, around the same time that Harald the Fair-Haired was causing so much trouble in Norway.
How does the poem begin? Can you give us the Norse version and the English translation afterwards?
Well, why don't I read you a little bit of the opening of the Poetic Edda, and it's called Völuspá. Hljóðs bið ég allar, helgar kinder, meiri og minni, mögu heimdalar. Vildu að ég valföður, vil telja það, forn spjöll fyrra, þau fremst man.
And what does that mean when you translate it?
Silence, I ask of all, holy offspring, higher and lesser of Heimdallr's offspring. Do you want me, Valfurður, and that means Odin, to well count those ancient tales, those that are farthest in our memory?
And who's speaking here? This is a kind of a seer or prophetess, isn't it?
Yeah, that's giving us an opening to the stories of the past, the great myths of the Norse world.
So Gudrun, our featured Viking for today, appears well into these poems.
Yeah.
First of all, the name Gudrun. What does that mean in Old Norse?
It comes from two words, Gurð, which means God, and Rune, which means a rune. And so literally it's God's rune, but I suppose the meaning of that is some kind of special knowledge or wisdom.
God's handwriting.
Yes, God's handwriting, or the mark of the gods. And actually, it's such a powerful name because of those two elements, isn't it? And Gurð here comes from a Proto-Germanic word, a really old word for God.
So we're going to have a few Gudruns along the line in this series. This is the first of our Gudruns. Where was this Gudrun, the Gudrun, the proto-Gudrun from?
Well, she comes from the Germanic kingdom of the Burgundians, who are from the Rhine and who lived in the 5th century AD. And this is really a family or a clan of brothers. In Old Norse, they're called the Gjuklingar, and that just means they're the sons of Gjuki. And remember, Gudrun's patronymic is Gjukadóttir, so she's the daughter of Gjuki. And Gudrun had two brothers, Gunnar and Hugni. They're the main figures in this side of the story.
What kind of a woman was Gudrun said to be at this young age?
She was beautiful, she was rich, she was a princess who had been admired by all since she was a girl. Gudrun was, I suppose you could say, the perfect queen in waiting. She was ready to marry a great king.
And who was this great king that was her first marriage?
She was married to a very famous figure in the Norse world called Sigurdur. And he's the one who killed the dragon Fafnir. So in Norse mythology, Sigurd is known as one of the Volsungs. And there's a whole saga about them called Volsunga Saga. And Sigurdur appears in all kinds of places, including on runestones from the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries throughout Scandinavia. So he's a really major figure in Norse mythology.
Does he pop up in Wagner's operas as well, Kári?
Yeah, so this is where Wagner got his stories for the Ring Cycle. It's really about Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. So
right.
He is actually Gudrun's first husband, just the beginning of her life.
And is he Siegfried in the Ring saga?
Yeah.
Right. So Siegfried is the German form of this Norse name, Sigurd.
Yeah. Yes.
So what became of this marriage of Gudrun to Sigurd or Siegfried the Dragon Slayer, Kári?
Well, I'm sorry to say that Sigurd didn't live long enough to enjoy his marriage for very long. He fell out with Gudrun's brothers, and eventually Sigurd was killed, and he left behind some treasure. He left behind a great amount of gold, and that passed on from him to the brothers, this gold that Sigurd claimed in his fight with the dragon.
So Gudrun is now a very, very, very wealthy woman, according to the legend.
Yeah.
And at this point, a new husband walks onto the stage. And he's identified by the name of Atli.
Yeah.
But isn't this guy Attila the Hun, Kári?
It is, yeah. So we're actually dealing here with one of the most famous leaders of all time, right? Attila the Hun, from the east.
You know, it's really hard to imagine how feared and hated Attila and his Hunnic army were in the Roman world, in the wider world, in the 5th century AD. We're in this kind of later phase of the ancient Roman Empire at this point, and they were seen as these unholy demons from hell. And in fact, it's often thought that the references that you see in the Bible and in the Quran to the hordes of Gog and Magog, the apocalypse beasts from the Badlands in the east, there's some thought that they might have been the Huns, these riders that came out of the Eurasian steppe.
Yeah.
No barbarian tribe had ever really succeeded in mastering the kind of siege technology required to penetrate the stone city walls that had been built around the Roman cities. But the Huns were different. They had siege towers. They had these gigantic swinging battering rams that they used to smash their way into the Roman cities. They could ride at great speed, stop, turn, or maneuver in the saddle, reposition and fire, and absolutely no one could beat them in open battle.
And how were they seen in the great city of Constantinople, Richard?
The Huns to them were a bit like what the Vikings were to Western Europeans. They were a people that emerged from a part of the world, from the Huns' case, it was the Eurasian steppes, and the Vikings, of course, came from Scandinavia. But both places were called the womb of nations because both these regions of the world, the Eurasian steppe and Scandinavia, kept throwing out these great warrior nations that no one had ever heard of until they were right there on your doorstep, presenting a clear and present danger. But the thing that gave the Huns an extra charge of terror was the Huns had a practice with their small children. They would bandage their infants' skulls while they were still malleable to elongate them and keep them that way, so that some of the warriors would have these elongated skulls that made them look demonic and otherworldly.
Oh my God.
But on the other hand, in Constantinople, that kind of demonic quality exerted a kind of glamour on some younger people in the city, because it's reported that in the Hippodrome, the great sporting stadium of Constantinople, the great chariot race stadium right in the middle of the city, it used to attract these huge crowds, and they had these sporting teams, the Blues and the Greens, and some of the younger hooligans in the Hippodrome would sport Hunnic haircuts, which was a kind of a mullet haircut, shaved at the sides, long at the front and at the back.
So it's not a new haircut, that one?
It's not a new haircut. And then, as now, it's a threat to all good order, decency and civilization, Kári. Yes. And it was like that. It was like being a skinhead. It had the same effect. It's like the nice middle-class people of Constantinople would look at these young hooligans with Hun haircuts and go, the young folk, what's wrong with them? What's the matter with them today? So this is the effect they had. The Romans had a name for Attila too, the king of the Huns. The Romans named him Flagellum Dei, the scourge of God. And so clearly his reputation extended as far as Scandinavia. So how was he presented, though, in these Norse texts that we're drawing on here for the life of Gudrun?
Well, you get the feeling as well there that there's this incredible impression being created, just like you've spoken about with the Roman world, almost like a shock that this person is so powerful and forceful, and there's some suddenness about him. He comes across as extremely strong and extremely greedy. He wants everything and gets very upset if something's being held back from him. That's the impression you get from this version of Attila, like an immense overriding desire to own what's around him.
So he's super greedy. And is this greed seen as a kind of great animating characteristic, or is it some kind of flaw in his character?
Well, that's the strange thing, right? Because, kings are meant to be generous. And giving away your gold is a sign of your status and your generosity and your ability to be greater than the normal run-of-the-mill desires around you. You're not governed by greed. You're governed by some bigger consideration. But he isn't. In this work, he really does want everything to himself. And also in the character of the other people in this story, the brothers Gunnar and Högni, who have gold and seem to be hoarding it as well. So we've got here a story about people who are holding on rather than giving.
And does this feed into these legends of dragons? You spoke there of Sigurd killing the dragon. Dragons hoard gold, don't they? Like the dragon in Beowulf.
Yeah.
The dragon in The Hobbit, Smaug, in Tolkien's story of The Hobbit, they hoard gold. And it just seems to make them miserable, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you often get kings being referred to as ring givers. A sign of a strong king is the one who's willing to give his wealth away and build alliances, obviously, through that, but also show his generosity and that he doesn't care about wealth. His own wealth is not what's driving him.
So we have Attila the Hun then, who appears in this story, this Norse story, as a man who has a gold lust that's not good for him.
Yeah.
And are they well matched temperamentally, Gudrun and Attila the Hun?
Well, as hard as it is to think of a match between Attila the Hun and someone else, it does seem as though they actually do get along well. We're told that Gudrun was tall and that her hair fell all the way down her back to her waist. The poem says that her eyes cut through men like swords and arrows, and that on her slender neck she wore necklaces of gold, but even her jewels were nothing compared to hers. So I think the poet is telling us that Atle fell very deeply in love with Gudrun, and they ended up getting married, and Gudrun went to live with Attila the Hun, and they had 2 sons, and their names were Erp and Eitil.
So things are fine at the outset in this marriage between Gudrun and Attila the Hun. They've got these 2 sons. They're living, we can only presume, somewhere in Hungary, the Hungarian plain, which is the far western end of the Great Eurasian Steppe. But even today, apparently, Hungarians still name their children Attila in his honour, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah, unnecessary side note from me as well, that Atle is still a fairly common name in Iceland. as well.
That's the Norse version of Attila. So you've got Attilas in Reykjavik then, Kári. Is that what you're telling me?
Exactly. There's Attilas in Reykjavik all the way.
Did you narrowly escape being called Attila yourself by any chance?
I don't think I had that tyrannical glint in my eye that mothers look for before they call their children Atli.
So, Kári, tell me now how things go bad between Attila and Gudrun.
It's to do with this gold. Attila is greedy, and he hears about the gold that Gudrun's brothers have and haven't given him. I mean, Gudrun really is why they have the gold. She was married to Sigurd, and really she has some right to that gold. And when Attila hears that it hasn't come with her as part of the marriage, he gets upset and he starts to want that gold very badly. And he begins to plot for a way to get it from the brothers.
How does he do that?
So one day he sends this famous messenger, a man called Gnefröður, to visit the brothers and to deliver a message, an invitation to come and visit Attila. And the messenger rides across a forest called Myrkviður, or the Black Forest, that separates the Burgundian and Hun kingdoms. And the brothers welcome the messenger, and yet they also seem a bit wary of him. And I think this is their wariness of Attila. They don't really trust their sister's husband. They're waiting for something bad to come with this messenger.
And what does the messenger put to these brothers?
He asked them to travel with him to the kingdom of the Huns, and he promised them that it would be worth their while. He said, "You will be honoured with treasure and horses and shields and dogs, freshly shaved ash spears, red gold helmets, silver-laced saddlecloths, lances, everything that you can imagine, even the land where Sigurd the dragon slayer was killed, and all the treasure there will be given to you if you'll just accept this invitation to visit the court of Attila the Hun."
And Gudrun, what did she think of this invitation?
She must have sensed that something was wrong, and actually she must have known Attila really well, because she sent a gift as well. She gave the messenger an arm ring to give to her brothers, but this as well, she wrapped the arm ring in wolf's fur and then took a strand of the fur and tied it around the ring. And she was trying to say to the brothers, these gifts are not what they seem. There's some sort of cruel intention here. Attila's not to be trusted.
He's wolfish.
He's wolfish, yeah.
So when the messenger arrives and hands out this invitation that you're going to be given every wonderful thing under the sun, they also receive Gudrun's gift, which is a clear warning to them that only they can understand. They've been warned. Do they go anyway?
Well, Gunnar the king turns to his brother Högni and asks him, what do you think we should do? Should we go anyway? He says, there's nothing we need. None of these treasures that we're being offered mean anything to us. We don't need any more money. We already own 7 buildings filled with swords. Every one of our swords has a gold hilt on it. He says, my horse is faster than any other horse. I have enough armor and bows and blades. What can I possibly gain from visiting Attila the Hun? And then there's the gift. She's wrapped it in wolf's fur. She's telling us to stay away. But I don't think Gunnar was ever going to say no.
Why? Why does he have to go?
It's such a strange thing, isn't it? But he seems to feel as though it would be cowardly not to go, especially given that he knows that it's a trap.
Oh, no.
Do you know what I mean? Like, once he knows that the knives are out, he has to go, because otherwise it would be admitting some kind of fear of the trap that he's just been warned about. And I think everyone around them is desperately afraid about what's happening. I mean, they're going to their deaths, and everyone knows it.
So rather stupidly, the two brothers decide to go to Attila, to go to his kingdom. And I suppose that means they've got to ride out of what was Burgundy then, through the Black Forest and into modern-day Hungary, where Attila's kingdom is. What happens when they arrive at Attila's great hall?
They walk in, and we're told that the hall was lined with benches and that the walls were decorated with shields, both large and small shields. So it must have been an incredible sight to see this power and this wealth. And they see Attila, and he's sitting there, and he's drunk already. So they arrive at this big drinking session. We know that Attila drank a lot, and so suddenly they're in a large world of noise and clamour. But we're also told that Gudrun had not been drinking, so she's been waiting for her brothers, and when she sees them, she feels this terrible dread of what is about to happen. She goes and speaks to the brothers, and she says to them that they shouldn't have come, and if they were going to come, they should have brought support. They should have brought soldiers with them, so they at least had some chance. Before they can react to Gudrun's spoken warning to them, Attila's men pounce. They capture Gunnar straight away, but Högni is able to keep fighting, and we're told that he puts 7 men to their deaths with his sword, and then an 8th man he throws into the fire. But at the end of that fight, he is also captured, and Attila separates the brothers, and he puts them into different cells. He wants to get some information. He thinks that if the brothers are separated, they're isolated, and he can say what he wants about them to each other. So he goes and sees Gunnar first, the king, the older brother, and he tells him that he can buy his life if he will just tell him where the gold is being hidden. But Gunnar wants to know about his brother, and he says, "Where is he?" And Attila says, "I've already had him killed." "Show me his heart then," says Gunnar. "I want to see it for myself. You'll have to cut it out and bring it to me before I'll tell you anything about the gold." So Attila actually told his men to bring Högni's heart to the cell. And they came back with a human heart in their hands. They gave it to Attila, and then he held it out in front of Gunnar, cupped in his hands. And the heart still quivered. It shook. "There you are," he said. "You have what you wanted. Now tell me where the gold is." Gunnar looked at the heart and said, "That isn't my brother's heart. His wouldn't tremble. You've brought me the heart of a coward. It must have quivered even more when he was alive than it is now."
And was it true? Was it not his brother's heart?
It wasn't Högni's heart at all. They just killed some poor man, some frightened man, and brought his heart instead. So Attila went into Högni's cell and held him down and cut open his chest, and while he was still alive, pulled out Högni's heart. And he brought it back to Gunnar's cell, and this time he held out a heart that was beating evenly, and Gunnar knew that it was his brother's heart. He said, "It beats brave and true, just as it did when he was alive."
Oh, so what then, Kári? What does Attila say after he's presented Gunnar with this ghastly scene?
Attila thinks that he's going to get the gold now. He's done what Gunnar asked. He's shown what he's capable of. He says, "Tell me where the gold is." Gunnar's response is, "You've just shown me that the only other person who knew where the gold was is now dead. And now I know that the secret of this gold will die with me. I will never tell you where it's buried."
Huh.
Attila was furious. Gunnar had really humiliated him and outplayed him. He was never going to get the gold. The thing that he most wanted was going to stay out of his reach forever. He told Gunnar that he was going to suffer a very slow death. He took him to a pit of snakes and threw him into the pit.
Just like Ragnar Lothbrok, the legend of Ragnar Lothbrok.
Yeah, exactly.
So what about Gudrun? What did she do when she learned that one of her brothers was dead and the other one, Gunnar, was about to be killed in a pit of snakes?
We're told that Gudrun held back her tears, and she reminded Attila of the oaths that he'd sworn to her brothers when she'd married him. She reminded him that he had obligations to her brothers, that he'd broken his word. She's telling Attila that he's in the wrong, like he has breached a sacred duty. Then she ran to be with Gunnar and said that she would stay with him on the edge of the pit until he died. He asked for her to bring him a harp, and the poem says that he played music while the snakes were wrapping themselves around his legs.
So both Gudrun's brothers have now been murdered by her husband, Attila the Hun. What revenge does Gudrun come up with for this crime against her family and this crime against her honour and her family's honour?
She began by preparing a meal, and it's a meal that Gudrun would be remembered for all time. She took the meal out and went inside the hall, and she served it to Attila and then to his followers. She said, "Drink up, enjoy the food that I'm giving you." And they all did. They kept drinking and eating. When Attila was finished his meal, she asked him whether he'd enjoyed the food. "Yes," he said. "What was it?" She said, "It's your sons." She had made him a meal from the flesh of their sons, Erp and Eitil. "You've eaten their hearts," she said. "I coated them in honey. You will never see them again. You will never call them onto your knees. You will never watch them ride or throw spears. They will never sit with you in the hall. You killed my brothers, and I have killed your sons."
You'll never see them again. You'll never call them up onto your knees. You will never watch them ride or throw spears.
And actually, we really see Attila there, how he was with his sons when she recites those things that they used to do together.
And what effect does this news have on Attila, the knowledge that he's eaten a meal of his own sons?
He is devastated, distressed. He begins to groan. He begins to weep. He can't bear it. He can't bear this loss, this news. He leaves the hall and he lies down in his room. He's distressed beyond words and he can't even get up. And actually, everyone in the hall is like this. There's this great wailing when they hear this news.
And from Gudrun, is she wailing and crying at her own actions here?
The poem says that Gudrun never grieved, that she didn't cry. She didn't show her emotions through tears. I mean, I guess we see her emotions in her actions, but she didn't seem to show her grief for either her brothers or for her children. And she wasn't finished either. that night, after Attila finally found some comfort in sleep, she stabbed him to death in his bed, and then she burnt down the hall.
What are we to make of this? Are we to see her as a woman of enormous heartlessness, or a woman of enormous self-command, and a woman of extraordinary composure?
It's so hard to get your head into a place where you can start to understand why this would have made her a famous and, in a sense, admired person.
Admired?
Yeah, she is called up in other verses as being the epitome of family loyalty, of honor, and of the vengeance code, the need to balance any kind of injury to your family. But the poem doesn't really solve that for us. There's also a horror in the poem at what's happening, and it doesn't try and iron that out or even that out for us. She's somehow both monstrous in her actions and seen to be admirable for her loyalty and the totality of her actions. I find it's really hard to understand.
So the poet doesn't shy away from presenting the horror of this act of revenge. It gives us the full horror of this. But at the same time, are you saying it refuses to condemn her, condemn her actions in taking revenge in such a murderous way? With the murder of innocence, with the murder of her own two sons.
Yeah, and the incredible hurt that she's doing to herself as well. She's not just hurting Attila. When she does this, she's causing her own terrible grief as well. And no, it isn't the case that she is condemned. And, later on we meet other saga figures who call on Gudrun's reputation as being something of a guide, if not the actual things that she does, the murders, is certainly the spirit of those actions, what she symbolizes in one's commitment to one's blood relations.
Is there anything more highly prized in Viking culture than a son? I mean, is that the absolute gold standard? Is there anything more prized in that culture than a son?
It's a great question. I actually, one of the funny things that, I don't really think from my reading of the sagas that sons are put ahead of daughters. When you read the stories, that there is this wonderful sense that both sons and daughters are welcomed into the world equally and are just as capable of bringing honor and richness to a family. But children, this is a society where children are very present in the stories. This is not a culture that's indifferent to children or cruel to children. If anything, it's the opposite. It seems really very focused on the next generation always.
I think with this kind of sacrifice, Kári, it's so hard for us to get our head around, and it sort of underlines a point I think I keep making, which is that the reason why we are so fascinated with them is that we can recognise so much in them, in their lives, certainly in the sagas, that is so recognisably human. We can see so much of ourselves, our own lives, our own dreams, our desires, our fears, all those things in their lives. And there's that 10% that's so different that makes them like creatures from outer space to us. And now we're in this realm where what I think is happening here, what the poet is putting to us in this story, is that she's done the hard and necessary thing. She's offered up her two sons, the most precious things in the world to her, as a sacrifice to the necessity of the revenge she must take against the crime of her husband. against herself, her honour, and her family's honour. And that's just how it is.
Yeah, I agree with you, Richard. I think, that idea of ethical absolutism. When I think about myself and how I judge things in the world around me, I think sometimes I sort of am always wondering about the ambiguities and the subtleties and things. And then there are people who really see the right and the wrong way and are driven to do what they believe is absolutely right and necessary. There's another character in the sagas called Gisli Surson, and at one point in the saga he is disappointed in his sister. She actually turns against him, and he says to her, "You're nothing like Gudrun, this woman who knew what was right and what to do." And he was the same. Gisli, this man, was very ethically clear about how you should behave and what lines you should follow. And yeah, I agree with you, Richard. There's something about this poem that seems to say that is worthwhile, that ethical clarity is worthwhile.
You see, I hate the world that these moral absolutists want the rest of us to live in.
Yeah, I struggle with it as well. And yet there seems to be something in this poem that denies that clarity. It's just so destructive, isn't it?
There's another thing that comes from what you've just told me about the fact that she's mentioned by Gisli in Gisli's saga, the events of which are said to take place hundreds of years after this legendary event, let's say. Such had her fame spread that this obscure dude in Iceland brings up her name as an example of the absolute epitome of an ethical woman, of a hard-as-nails, bending, moral woman. She would kill her own children to maintain her family's honour. It's a gangster's logic in some ways.
I think it's very similar, don't you, to the code of the family gang or something? We'll take care of it internally.
Gudrun is almost certainly a fictional person. I think her story is a conflation of two true stories, which is the story of a Byzantine princess called Princess Honoria, who amazingly, in the 5th century, wrote a letter to Attila the Hun, the great enemy of the empire, with a ring in it, which was taken by Attila as a proposition of marriage. That's one part of Gudrun's story, I think. And the other part is the story of Ildiko, which was Attila the Hun's last wife. And according to the histories, a great wedding feast was held on the marriage day of his marriage to Ildiko. And Attila, who, as the poem shows us, was indeed an alcoholic, he drunk himself into a stupor and then was later discovered in his wedding tent choking on blood, and modern doctors today suspect he had a burst hemorrhoid in his esophagus and was drowning in his own blood. Or was he poisoned by Ildiko? Because I think that was the initial legend, was that his last wife had poisoned him. So the legend of Gudrun seems to be a conflation, to my mind, a rough conflation of the story of Princess Honoria and the last wife of Attila the Hun, Ildiko. Nonetheless, does that matter that she's fictional?
I don't think just because we see her as a mythic character, people in the hundreds of years after her life necessarily saw her that way. I think they may have believed enough in her reality for her to have felt like someone who was alive and was real and was a kind of a guidepost for clear ethical action.
And just finally, Kári, Attila the Hun's one of the key figures who burns down so much of the classical world of the ancient Romans, and he helps carry Europe into the early medieval period, which will eventually move into the Viking era. And the world is changing. Europe is changing. Cities are becoming walled cities. Defensive outposts are becoming fortified, high-walled castles. And because of the Huns, the myth of Roman invincibility has been punctured for good.
Yeah.
And within the next century, the whole apparatus of the Western Roman Empire will simply collapse. So in this series now, we've moved from the ancient world into the early medieval period. But before we leave Attila the Hun, this is a bit of a sidebar, but can I just tell you one last story about one of Attila the Hun's unintended, unplanned offspring?
Yeah.
Okay, so as Attila's charging his way through Western Europe. He's going through northern Italy, he's sacked Milan and the city of Verona, and he comes to the ancient Roman city of Aquileia. Aquileia is on the Adriatic coast, near where the modern-day Italian border with Slovenia is.
Yeah.
And Aquileia is just flattened by the Huns. It's razed to its foundations. And all the local inhabitants are fleeing the fury of Attila's army by leaping into their boats with whatever they could carry, and they're escaping with their belongings to the marshy islands that are sort of here and there scattered in the lagoon in the Adriatic Sea. And these people reasoned correctly that the Hunnish horsemen wouldn't want to go across the water to chase them. And over time, the merchants and the fishermen on these muddy islands in the lagoon form a prosperous community, and they're quite untroubled by the raiding barbarians on the mainland. Over time, trading posts and houses and wharves have sprung up on these muddy islands. The merchants prosper. They decide they need more land or more real estate, so they lay foundations in the marshes by driving closely spaced timber poles right down into the mud until the poles hit bedrock, and then they saw the trunk tops off to make them flush, to make them a flat surface, a foundation. And in this way, they're able to build houses and grand mansions and churches and public squares. The channels between the islands are shored up with brick embankments. They're turned in canals, and I'm sure you're way ahead of me here, Kári, but this is how the most serene republic of Venice comes into being. Venice, the accidental child of Attila the Hun.